He walked into Portland International Airport on November 24, 1971, wearing a pressed grey suit, a black tie, and a face no one would remember clearly. Because it was the kind of face built to disappear. No driver's license, no real name, just a ticket, cash paid. They called him Dan Cooper later, a reporter's mistake that turned into the legend D.B. Cooper. But the man who sat down in seat 18C wasn't a legend. He was something worse, a man who should not exist. He ordered bourbon and soda. He smoked his Raleigh cigarettes calmly while the engines howled outside. The stewardess thought nothing of it when he slipped her a folded note. At first she didn't even read it, until he leaned close and whispered 4 words that would change history forever. "Miss, I have a bomb. Not a threat, not a shout. A statement delivered with the calm of death. They told you this was just a heist. A clever criminal who stole $200,000 and vanished into the clouds. But that's the story for children, for newspapers that keep you docile. If you strip away the myth, the black parachute opens on a darker truth. This man was trained. He knew the aircraft's exact capabilities, which altitude kept the cabin pressure safe for a jump, which flap settings slowed a Boeing 727 without stalling. That knowledge doesn't come from a magazine. Someone taught him. Someone prepared him. Someone wanted him to succeed. The FBI swarmed the skies. Helicopters roared over the forests of Washington. But when the night ended, there was no body, no parachute, no manhunt to follow, only a closed file cabinet in a federal office and a silence louder than any gunshot. That silence was no accident. It was a decision. Why would anyone protect a hijacker who benefits when a man vanishes without a trace? The marked bills meant to catch him were scattered like breadcrumbs, a trail that led nowhere, a performance for the public. While America gawked at the myth of a sky bandit, something far more dangerous slipped by unnoticed. This was not a robbery. This was a message. The man in the grey suit did not simply disappear into the void. He walked through a door the rest of us were never meant to see. The jet rolled down the runway at 2:50 p.m. and lifted into the November sky, engines screaming against the gathering storm. He sat calm, like a man who had already rehearsed every second of what was about to happen. The briefcase rested beside him, ordinary black leather hiding something far from ordinary. When the stewardess sat down beside him, he didn't fidget. He didn't sweat. He opened the case just enough for her to see the wires and red cylinders inside. Real or fake, it didn't matter. She believed. That's all that mattered. He spoke softly, never raising his voice, as if hijacking an airliner was a routine business deal. He dictated his terms with surgical precision. $200,000 in cash, 4 parachutes, and a fuel truck ready in Seattle. Not a penny more, not a penny less. Why 4 parachutes? Because he knew what the FBI would think. If he asked for one, they'd hand him a sabotaged rig. If he asked for 4, they'd fear he planned to take hostages with him. That detail alone tells you what kind of man this was. Someone who knew how his enemy thought. The crew watched him as the clouds swallowed the sun, as lightning danced on the wings. But what chilled them wasn't the threat of explosives. It was his calm, no shaking hands, no trembling voice. His bourbon glass barely rippled. That is not the behavior of a desperate man. That is training. That is control. When they landed in Seattle, everything unfolded exactly as he planned. The marked bills appeared, neat stacks in a canvas bag. The parachutes arrived as ordered. The passengers were released unharmed, their lives spared. Not out of mercy, but out of design. He wasn't here to hurt people. He was here to vanish. The jet took off again at nightfall, with only him and the crew. He told the pilots to stay low, slow and steady. An altitude only a specialist would know could keep a 727 stable for a jump. At 8:13 p.m. over the black forests of Washington, the cabin door opened. A rush of icy wind screamed inside the plane. The man in the grey suit strapped on the black parachute, gripped the canvas bag and stepped into the void. They say no man could survive that jump. They say he was reckless, suicidal, insane. But what if he wasn't jumping into chaos? What if he was jumping into the arms of someone waiting for him? The Boeing 727 cut through freezing rain, engines throttled low, a black shape sliding across the November sky. Inside, the cockpit shook as the pressure warning light flashed. The aft stairs were down. At 8:13 p.m., the plane jolted hard. The crew felt it. Weight shifted, then silence. Somewhere in the blackness below, the man in the grey suit stepped into nothing. They told you no one could live through that jump. 40-degree winds slicing at 200 miles an hour. Needles of ice stabbing the skin. A pitch-black wilderness of rivers and pines. But ask yourself, does this sound like a man who makes mistakes? He knew the exact type of aircraft, the exact speed that kept the fuselage steady, the exact altitude that gave him enough time to pull a chute without blacking out. And he asked for a specific parachute, not military, not government issue, civilian. No tracers, no markers, no way to track him once he hit the ground. This wasn't luck. This wasn't desperation. This was coordination. He didn't land blind. He landed on a grid, a path only he knew. The FBI combed the forests with dogs and helicopters. They dragged rivers. They searched every farmhouse, every cabin. Nothing. No body. No blood. Not even a torn strap from the black parachute. But think, when the government really wants a man, do they just lose him? Do they shrug and walk away after one winter storm? If this were only a fugitive, they would have found him, or found proof of his death. Instead, what we got was a closed file cabinet, locked tighter than the vault at Fort Knox. Witnesses remember a man who didn't look scared. He looked ready. The stewardess said his eyes never blinked. He smoked his last cigarette with steady hands, the ash falling like clockwork. Calm as death. That is not the face of a man about to gamble with his life. That is the face of a man holding a ticket out, and someone on the other side holding the door open. What kind of man vanishes so cleanly? What kind of power makes the world look away? $200,000. In 1971, it sounded like a fortune. But think about this. He never spent it. Years later, only a small bundle of those marked bills turned up buried in the sand on the Columbia riverbank. Not at the jump zone. Not near any escape route. Almost as if someone wanted it to be found. The FBI told you it was evidence. But what if it was a message? What kind of man risks his life, plans an operation with military precision, only to throw the prize away? The money was bait. Not for him. For us. A distraction. Look at the cash. Chase the cash. Talk about the cash. While the real reason for the hijacking slides past unseen. Cooper asked for nothing beyond that ransom and the parachutes. No getaway car, no radio contact, no pickup crew, or so they told you. Yet witnesses saw strange lights in the woods that night. Pilots reported unidentified craft moving below radar. Coincidence or cooperation? The man in the grey suit knew how to disappear, not just physically, but psychologically. He let the authorities obsess over serial numbers, convinced that if they tracked the bills they'd catch him. But here's the truth. Men with real power don't need money. They use it like smoke, to hide the shape of what's behind it. That canvas bag of cash was never a treasure, it was a key, but to what nobody can answer, because the real investigation didn't end in those woods. It moved into sealed rooms and classified memos, documents marked for internal use only, some still locked away to this day. Why hold secrets about an air pirate if he simply died in the trees? Why keep entire case files redacted if it was just a man with a dream and a parachute? Could it be because this wasn't random at all? Could it be that Cooper's jump wasn't a robbery, but an extraction? The marked bills were never the prize. They were the footprint of something bigger, a black parachute vanishing into a blacker night, and a closed file cabinet that never opens. They called him calm, polite, even charming. Witnesses said he ordered a bourbon, left a tip, spoke with a voice as smooth as glass. But beneath that calm was something else. Not nerves, not fear, but control. The kind of control you don't learn from books. The kind of control that's drilled into you. Think about his suit. Plain grey. Not cheap, not flashy. A suit that disappears in a crowd. His black tie held with a mother-of-pearl pin. Not military issue. Not outlaw grit. The stewardess said he looked like a man who belonged in a boardroom, not on a wanted poster. He didn't sweat. He didn't fidget. He didn't even blink. Eyewitness sketches always feel off. Some say thin face, some say round. Some swear his eyes were brown, others blue. How does one man look different to every person who sees him? The FBI tried to build a single image, but maybe there wasn't one. Maybe the man in the grey suit was trained to be a ghost in plain sight. He knew the aircraft model better than the pilots. He knew which flap settings would hold the speed steady. He knew the aft stairs on the Boeing 727 could be lowered mid-flight, something only airline engineers or military insiders should have known in 1971. Is that the knowledge of a lone drifter? Or is that tradecraft? The kind that comes from an institution that doesn't put its name on paper. But here's what haunts me most. When a man robs for greed, his eyes dart. When a man robs for desperation, his hands shake. But Cooper robbed for something else. His heartbeat never spiked. The stewardess said his pupils never widened. It was as if he'd rehearsed this moment 100 times, or worse, as if this wasn't his first operation. When the sketches were released, veterans called in. Ex-pilots called in. Men who'd seen combat swore they recognized that stare. But every promising lead seemed to evaporate. Every tip went cold. And every time they got close, another drawer in the file cabinet slammed shut. Was he even one man at all? Or was Cooper just a mask, worn for one night, to vanish forever with a black parachute and no trace but the illusion of money? They called it the largest manhunt in FBI history. Planes scoured the forests, dogs tracked riverbanks, agents knocked on doors across the Pacific Northwest. That's what they told you. But the deeper you look, the stranger it gets. Why did critical radar data vanish? Why were early witness statements rewritten before release? Why did the Bureau openly announce every new theory, as if they wanted Cooper to know exactly how close they were getting? It's the little things. Evidence misplaced, then found years later. Leads dismissed for reasons that make no sense. Men who matched the description interrogated, then quietly released with no explanation. Even the flight crew, the only ones who saw him up close, were never allowed to speak freely in public again. When real power wants someone found, they are found. When real power doesn't, the trail goes cold, no matter how bright it burns. And this case, it didn't just go cold. It froze over instantly. The FBI kept claiming they had no suspects, yet leaked reports prove they had dozens. Several ex-military jumpers, several commercial pilots, even an aerospace engineer who mysteriously vanished from records. But none of these leads ever made it to court. They didn't even make it to indictment, almost like someone was cleaning house. What if the hijacking wasn't a crime to solve, but a secret to bury? What if the investigation was designed not to catch Cooper, but to keep him free? And then there's the ransom money. Marked bills, carefully recorded, supposedly so every dollar could be traced. But years later, a few bundles surface on a riverbank, half-rotted. No wallet, no parachute, no body, no footprints. Just enough to make the public think Cooper was dead. just enough to make the case seem solved without ever closing it. Every time a journalist asked hard questions, they hit a wall of silence. Every time a new witness appeared, their story mysteriously collapsed, and the official line never changed. We're doing everything we can. But ask yourself, what kind of investigation puts more energy into controlling the story than finding the man who benefits when the black parachute vanishes into the night, leaving only a closed file cabinet that no one's allowed to open? This wasn't a madman waving a pistol. This wasn't a desperate man begging for cash. This was a man who behaved like he'd already won. He knew the Boeing 727's aft stair could be lowered mid-flight, a feature buried deep in technical manuals, a detail even most pilots didn't know. He knew the exact speed and altitude needed to jump safely, giving instructions so precise the cockpit crew thought they were taking orders from an insider. He even knew which runway lighting would make the ransom drop less visible from above, and when the stewardess nervously mentioned turbulence, he just smiled, calm as death. Think about that. You don't learn that kind of detail reading a magazine. You learn it through training. The kind of training reserved for men whose names are etched into secret rosters. The FBI called it a civilian hijacking, but veterans saw the fingerprints of something darker. Paratroopers recognized his discipline. Airline engineers recognized his technical language. Intelligence officers recognized his cool detachment, the look of someone who's done dangerous things before and walked away without a scar. And here's where it gets unsettling. When a man knows too much, the authorities don't always want him caught. They want him erased. Early on, they had a chance. A few names floated in classified memos. Ex-Special Forces, former CIA contract pilots, men who had jumped into hostile air at night. But those names never appeared on the official list. They just disappeared into the closed file cabinet. Almost like the investigation wasn't chasing Cooper at all. It was protecting him. If you've made it this far, prove you're awake. Type the word awake in the comments. That's how we see who's really paying attention. Because this case isn't about $200,000 in marked bills. It isn't about a man in a grey suit ordering bourbon at 30,000 feet. It's about power. About what happens when someone with the wrong knowledge decides to use it, and how the system scrambles, not to punish him, but to cover the trail he left behind. Ask yourself, what terrified them more? That a man robbed an airline, or that a man out there knew how to rob the entire system and vanish without leaving a fingerprint? The night swallowed him whole. One moment, he was standing at the rear stairs of a Boeing 727, wind howling through the cabin, rain slicing sideways like glass. The next, gone. A single man stepping into a storm, wrapped in darkness, carrying $200,000 in marked bills. The black parachute flared open against the void, then vanished. No trace on radar, no emergency beacon, just a shape lost in the clouds. And that was the moment Cooper stopped being a man and became a myth. They say no one could have survived that jump. 40 degrees, 21,000 feet, pitch black sky. The kind of night where even trained soldiers hesitate. But Cooper didn't hesitate, not for a second. He walked into the wind, as if he'd done it 100 times before. And here's the strangest part. The ground search turned up nothing. No torn canopy, no discarded briefcase, no broken body tangled in the pines. It was as if the earth refused to hold him. Some say he drowned in the Columbia River. Some say he froze in the mountains. But if he died out there, where's the proof? If a man falls from the sky, he leaves scars. Cooper left none. Which makes you wonder, was his escape just luck? Or was it planned down to the last tree, the last contour line on a secret map? A jump like that isn't blind faith. It's muscle memory. And when the FBI tried to trace him, they found something unnerving. Witnesses described his face differently, his voice, his height, shifting, uncertain. It was like no one had ever really seen him at all. Like the man in the grey suit was just a mask. The vanishing point wasn't just where he hit the ground. The vanishing point was Cooper himself. And decades later, when a few rotting bundles of ransom cash surfaced on a riverbank, nowhere near the suspected landing zone, it only deepened the mystery. Evidence, yes, but evidence that contradicted the official story. So who parachutes into hell and walks away smiling? Who leaves behind clues designed to confuse, not reveal? The black parachute isn't just a getaway tool, it's a symbol. A man diving into the void and refusing to come back. $200,000, that's what the headline screamed. But think about it. In 1971, that's life-changing money for an ordinary man, but pocket change for the kind of man who could pull this off. Cooper never even checked the money. He didn't count it. He didn't demand gold, bearer bonds, or safe passage to another country. He asked for cash in $20 bills. Heavy, bulky, useless in bulk, unless you plan to vanish entirely. Does that sound like greed? Or does it sound like theatre? Because the money was marked. Every serial number recorded. The perfect bait to track any man foolish enough to spend it. If Cooper was as brilliant as his actions suggest, he knew this. He knew those bills weren't wealth. They were chains. And yet, he took them. Why, some believe the cash was irrelevant, a smokescreen to hide a larger truth. A man testing the system. A man sending a message. A man proving that even with the full weight of the FBI, the military and the media against him, a single individual could still slip through their fingers. Others whisper about deeper motives. Intelligence work. Black budget operations. A covert payoff disguised as a crime. If you wanted to move money in 1971 without a paper trail, staging a hijacking was one way to do it. But here's what really chills the blood. Not a single bill has ever entered normal circulation. Not one. Aside from a few bundles rotting on a sandbar, planted maybe, or accidentally lost, the ransom simply evaporated. What kind of man walks into a storm for money he never spends? Maybe the kind of man who didn't need it. Maybe the kind of man who wanted something else entirely. Proof. Proof that the closed file cabinet isn't locked. Proof that even the most secure systems have cracks. Proof that a faceless man in a grey suit could humiliate the entire apparatus of control and get away with it. T. His wasn't about wealth. It was about power. The kind that can't be printed, traced or buried in the ground. The kind that makes governments nervous. They said they wanted to catch him. They said they combed every forest, river and mountain in the Pacific Northwest. But look closer. Look past the press conferences and wanted posters. You'll see something else. Doors closing, not opening. Within weeks, key evidence disappeared into sealed files. Witness reports contradicting the official timeline were lost. Leads that pointed away from the wilderness, toward military backgrounds, government connections, were quietly buried under paperwork. The case wasn't cold. It was frozen, intentionally. FBI agents admitted later that certain details weren't for public release. Why not? This wasn't a national security breach, at least not on the surface. This was one man with a parachute and a bag of cash. So why treat it like a state secret? Some investigators even believed they knew who Cooper was. They hinted at it in interviews years later, but the name was never released. The file cabinet stayed locked. And then there are the missing fingerprints. They found partials on the aircraft, but none matched any suspect they dragged in, almost as if Cooper had prepared for this. Gloves, chemical wipes, or something more disturbing. Someone tampered with the evidence after the fact. The official story says they did everything to find him. The truth feels different. The truth feels like someone didn't want him found. And here's the question nobody asks. Why seal Cooper-related documents until the 2030s? Why does a simple hijacking require 6 decades of silence? What could possibly still be dangerous about a dead man's secret? unless the man isn't dead. Maybe Cooper wasn't just running from the law. Maybe the law was running cover for him. Imagine a file cabinet in a government basement, drawer marked Cooper, locked tight. Inside, not just a name and a face, but a connection. Military, intelligence, corporate, something that would shatter the myth of a lone wolf criminal and reveal a much darker picture, an inside man testing a system he already belonged to. If you followed this far, you're not like the others. You're seeing what you're not supposed to see. And before we go deeper, before we cross the line they tried to draw in ink, you'll need to prove you're awake. Type "awake" in the comments if you're still here. Let them know you see through the smoke. 50 years later, the truth about D.B. Cooper should be harmless. Just history. Just a man who hijacked a plane, grabbed some cash and vanished into the storm. That's the story they feed you. That's the story they want you to believe. But here's the fact no one can explain. Some Cooper files are still classified, locked, sealed until the 2030s. Ask yourself, why does the government bury a simple hijacking for more than 60 years? What could possibly be in those files? A confession? A name? Or something far worse, proof this was never a crime of desperation, but a controlled operation. You see, Cooper's legend is built on two lies. The first is that he was a nobody. The second is that he disappeared into thin air. Both serve the same purpose, to make the public stop asking questions. But the closer you look, the stranger it gets. The flight path was misreported. The drop zone shifted repeatedly. Witness descriptions were inconsistent, and yet eerily precise about one thing. Cooper wasn't nervous. He wasn't sloppy. He moved like a man on assignment, calm as death, eyes that never blinked. And here's what will haunt you. He never once referred to himself as D.B. Cooper. That was a media mistake that stuck, almost as if someone wanted a false name floating around, a decoy to hide the real man in the grey suit. Why keep this secret for decades? Not to protect Cooper, not to protect the public, to protect the system. If a man can humiliate federal authority and vanish, the myth of control collapses, and myths are more valuable than truth. So the file cabinet stays closed, not because they don't know who he was, but because they do. And they'd rather you never learn the kind of man who could sit on a storm-racked 727, order bourbon like it's a Tuesday night, and walk calmly into the night while the entire country watched. This is where our descent deepens. And from now on, we're not just talking about a man, we're talking about the machinery behind him, the power that shields ghosts and buries facts in locked drawers. Comment: I see the pattern twice below. Burn it into your mind, and into theirs. This is the point of no return. He wasn't flashy. No wild disguise, no cartoon mask, no trembling hands. Just a man in a grey suit, neat tie, polished shoes. Someone you'd pass on the street without a second glance. And that's exactly why he terrified them. Because the man in the grey suit is everywhere. In airports, in boardrooms, in government offices with windows that never open. He's invisible by design, not because you can't see him, but because you don't think to look. Every witness said the same thing. He was calm, too calm. He never raised his voice, never fumbled his words. He ordered bourbon and smoked cigarettes as though nothing around him mattered. Even when the plane shook through winter storms, he sat steady, like turbulence couldn't touch him. Who is like that? Not a desperate man, not a common criminal. The FBI called him an everyman. But they don't tell you that being forgettable is the highest camouflage. That's how agents, spies, and operators move through the world, unnoticed, untraceable. And when you look at Cooper through that lens, the pieces change shape. The black parachute wasn't a wild gamble. It was an exit strategy. The marked bills weren't payment. They were bait, planted to distract the public. And the man in the grey suit? He wasn't just a passenger. He was the test, a probe, a question aimed at the entire system. Could someone slip past the radar, humiliate federal authority, and vanish without a trace? Cooper didn't just answer yes. He proved it in real time, on national television. The legend says he vanished into the night sky. But what if he didn't vanish at all? What if he walked right back into an office the next morning, hung up his suit jacket, and waited for the phone call, the one that confirmed the test was successful? Look closely at any institution that claims absolute power, and you'll find men like him. Men who know how to disappear it, in plain sight. Men who never leave fingerprints, not because they're ghosts, but because someone cleans up behind them. Cooper stopped being a fugitive the moment his boots hit the ground. From that moment on, he became something else, a myth with a pulse. They say he leapt into the night with a cheap parachute, crude and unreliable, as if he had chosen death over capture. That's the comforting version, the story they sell to make him look reckless, human, beatable. But think about it. If Cooper was so meticulous, so precise, why would he trust his life to a canvas relic? Why would a man who planned every second of the hijacking leave the rest to chance? He wouldn't. Unless the jump itself was never about survival, unless the black parachute was a message. What message? That fear is an illusion. That control can be mocked. That even gravity itself bows to the man who knows how to use it. When he stepped into that freezing void, it wasn't a gamble. It was a ritual, a signal to anyone watching, especially the ones who understood the language of covert power. You see, Cooper's leap wasn't just an escape route. It was theater. The kind of theater meant for an audience you and I will never see. Every detail, the calm order for bourbon, the note passed to the stewardess, the demand for cash in small bills, was choreography. Even the storm that night worked in his favor, masking his trail like a curtain closing on an act. And here's the detail nobody talks about. One of the parachutes he was given had been tampered with. The FBI later admitted it. A training chute, sewn shut, impossible to use. Was it sabotage? Or was it part of the plan? Did Cooper even take that parachute at all? Or did he already have his own rig waiting where no one could see? Witnesses on the ground never saw a body. Search teams combed the forests, rivers, and mountains. Nothing. Not a single scrap of fabric, not a single broken bone. Just the black parachute, a symbol more than a clue. The kind of symbol that tells you the drop zone wasn't wilderness. It was silence. Silence bought by someone. Silence protected by someone. This is the part we call unsolved. Here most people turn away. They want to believe the man in the grey suit froze in the dark and vanished, because the alternative is worse. The alternative is that he lived, that he walked away untouched, and that someone made sure he stayed that way. They told the public the money would betray him, that every $20 bill was marked traceable, radioactive with federal ink. They said Cooper's greed would expose him, that no man could hold $200,000 without spending it, without slipping. But that's exactly the trick. The money was never meant to buy freedom. It was meant to be seen. It was a decoy, a trail of breadcrumbs leading nowhere, because Cooper never planned to use it. 9 years after the hijacking, a boy digging on the Columbia riverbank found a small bundle of those bills, rotten and decayed, buried under the sand. Not spent, not lost in the woods. Buried, like someone wanted them to be discovered just when the world started to forget. The FBI called it an accident. But ask yourself, who buries evidence just deep enough to survive nearly a decade, yet shallow enough to be found by chance? That isn't luck. That's a reminder. A message left like a calling card. I'm still out here, and I'm still untouchable. Think about how much noise they made over those bills. Press conferences, photographs, every serial number catalogued. But after all that, the case didn't move an inch. Why? Because Cooper didn't touch the money. Someone else staged its reappearance to feed the story, to keep the legend alive, or to steer it away from the truth. The real power of those marked bills wasn't financial. It was psychological, a leash for public attention, a way to make people believe the hijacking was about money, not control, the perfect sleight of hand. You watch the bills, you miss the man, you follow the cash, you walk right into a dead end. But there's something even darker. What if Cooper didn't bury the money at all? What if someone else, someone cleaning up loose ends, placed it there years later? Because every myth needs an artifact. Every ghost story needs a footprint. That bundle of bills is the footprint they wanted you to see. Meanwhile, the real trail, Cooper's real path, stays buried much deeper, in places where the public will never dig. And that's the truth no one wants to face. The money was never the prize. The money was the trap. Some truths don't vanish. They're locked away, not burned, not shredded, sealed, because someone wants them preserved, but hidden. And that's where D.B. Cooper's story slips from crime into something colder. The FBI admitted it. Thousands of pages of investigation, interviews and leads are still off limits. Not because they're sensitive to family names, not because they reveal a security weakness from 50 years ago. No, they're locked because they expose connections that shouldn't exist. Picture a grey metal cabinet in a federal office. No labels, no fingerprints, just a heavy drawer that refuses to open. Inside a file stamped, "Do not release until reviewed." Why? Why seal anything if Cooper was just a lone thief with a parachute and a dream? What could possibly be dangerous about a dead hijacker? Here's what they never say out loud. Some of those interviews link Cooper to places he shouldn't have been. Airports used by covert programs, military supply depots that don't show up on maps, names of men who later appear in intelligence work overseas, a pattern too sharp to be coincidence. And here's the unsettling part. Those locked files have review dates, some not until the 2030s. Ask yourself, who needs 60 years to decide if a simple hijacking can be made public? Who benefits from keeping Cooper's shadow alive, but never letting it take shape? The silence isn't an accident. It's curated, just like the black parachute, just like the buried bills. The closed file cabinet is the third symbol. It tells you the truth wasn't erased. It was catalogued, filed, and placed on a shelf where only a few are allowed to look. You can hear it if you imagine standing in that room. The hum of fluorescent lights, the dead air of bureaucratic secrecy, the soft metallic click as the drawer shuts again, and the unspoken warning, don't ask what's inside. Don't pull this thread. But men who refuse to stop asking, men like you, already feel it. The cabinet isn't closed to protect Cooper. It's closed to protect the people who helped him disappear. People who never wanted the trail to lead higher than one man in a grey suit. Because if it did, you'd stop asking about Cooper and start asking who he was really working for. They sold you an image. One man, calm as stone, drinking bourbon on a stormy night flight, a briefcase with a bomb, a parachute into the void. The perfect outlaw myth. But myths are built, not born. And this one was too clean, too precise. Think about it. Cooper knew exactly which aircraft to hijack. The Boeing 727, the only commercial jet with an aft stairway that could be lowered mid-flight. That's not random knowledge from a newspaper, that's technical insider information. And he knew the altitude, the airspeed, even the flight path geography. He wasn't guessing. He was following a plan. So ask yourself, who gave him that plan? Who told him about a stair design only military paratroopers and a handful of engineers understood? Who supplied the black parachute, the one symbol of his vanishing act, packed to survive not a thrill jump, but a tactical exit? The truth is in the details. He didn't just demand money. He demanded specific fuel loads, specific parachutes, and specific conditions for departure. That's coordination, That's logistics. And logistics require people. When he walked through the airport in his grey suit, he wasn't just a man disappearing into the crowd. He was a messenger of something larger, an operation with fingerprints wiped clean. And every time the FBI called him a lone wolf, it wasn't an analysis. It was a cover. Because a lone wolf can die. But a network? That's untouchable. Remember the recurring symbols: the black parachute, controlled escape; the marked bills, misdirection; the closed file cabinet, silent protection. Every piece points to one conclusion: Cooper was never truly alone. Imagine this. Somewhere, in a bar that doesn't exist on maps, a man in a darker suit waits with a drink already poured. Cooper steps in, hands over the ransom untouched, and walks out empty-handed but alive. The money wasn't for him. It was a delivery, a transfer, a test, and you were never supposed to notice. That's why half a century later his name still echoes like a riddle. Because they don't want you to ask the real question, not who was D.B. Cooper, but who built him. They told you Cooper jumped with a parachute, like some daredevil thief gambling with death, but they never told you where that parachute really came from, because it wasn't bought off a shelf. It wasn't rented from a skydiving school. It was military grade, rigged for survival, not sport. One of the 4 chutes he received was fake, a training dummy with no functional canopy, something a civilian might pick by mistake. Cooper didn't pick it. He knew exactly which rig was live. He didn't hesitate, didn't ask. He took the black parachute, the one symbol that has followed his name like a shadow. That kind of certainty isn't luck. It's preparation. Investigators traced one of the chutes to a company supplying the Air Force. Another was linked to a private supplier with government contracts, yet somehow those leads went cold. No hard interviews, no public follow-up, as if someone didn't want the trail to go where it was pointing. Think about that. A hijacker who supposedly acted alone just happens to get gear tied to restricted military channels. Not a coincidence. A message. Someone made sure Cooper had what he needed, and made sure no one asked how. You can almost hear it. The snap of harness webbing, the whisper of nylon against the cold November wind, the roar of the 727's engines fading as he steps into the night sky. This wasn't chaos. This was choreography, and choreography means a choreographer. Why would a real network help one man vanish into the void? Not for money, not for loyalty, for leverage, for proof that a civilian aircraft could be breached, controlled, and exploited, and no agency could stop it. The perfect demonstration wrapped in a single name: D.B. Cooper. And when the FBI pretended this was just a lucky outlaw, they weren't confused. They were protecting something or someone, just like they've done before, just like they'll do again. The black parachute wasn't just his way out. It was the signature of the hand guiding him, and that hand has never been revealed. Every man who hears the name D.B. Cooper asks the same question: could I have done it? Could I have walked onto that plane in a grey suit, demanded a ransom with calm precision, and stepped into the storm with nothing but a black parachute and iron nerves? But that's the wrong question. The real question isn't about skill. It's about purpose. Why vanish? Why erase yourself from the grid? Would you do it to escape the system, or to join the shadow running it? Because make no mistake, disappearing isn't freedom if you're still serving someone else. Cooper didn't vanish into the wilderness like some wild outlaw. If he survived, he vanished into silence, into protection, into something that wanted him hidden. That's not rebellion. That's recruitment. So which would you choose? Freedom, the kind where you live by no man's rules, but starve, freeze, and fight alone. Or power, the kind where you kneel to a faceless master in exchange for resources, safety, and control. As you think about it, hear the scene again. The cabin lights dim. The engines hum steady at 10,000 feet. Cooper's voice is calm. too calm, as he checks his watch and cinches his harness. He's not nervous because this isn't risk. This is a door opening. A door someone else unlocked. And now I'm asking you, if that door opened for you, which way would you step? Into the night as your own man, hunted and hungry, or into the arms of power, invisible and protected? If you've made it this far, answer below. Would you disappear for freedom or for power? Type your choice in the comments. Not for me, for you. To see which part of you is awake. Because the truth is, most men already made their choice without knowing it. They live small, safe lives under someone else's rules, pretending it's freedom. Cooper didn't pretend, he acted. And the fact that his name still haunts the system means he didn't just jump out of a plane. He jumped out of the narrative they built for you. Which side would you take if you had to jump tonight? They'll tell you the D.B. Cooper case is closed, that there's nothing left to find. But if that were true, why are certain files still sealed? Why are their pages blacked out in the official reports, decades later, in a case where no one died and no classified technology was stolen? That isn't how you treat a lone criminal. That's how you treat a state secret. Picture a metal file cabinet deep in a government archive, its drawers marked with coded numbers instead of names. One drawer, locked. Not because it's empty, because what's inside would burn the story to the ground. Witnesses gave descriptions that didn't match the official composite. Agents admitted under oath that not every lead was followed. And still, key evidence vanished. Not destroyed. Hidden. Money from the ransom resurfaced years later on a riverbank, but only some of it. Enough to feed the myth, not enough to close the case. That's how you manage a story, not solve one. If this were just a man with a briefcase bomb, the truth would have been dumped in the open long ago. But the black parachute, the marked bills, the sudden silence from the bureau, these aren't loose ends. They're deliberate signals. Someone wanted Cooper to vanish. Someone higher than the investigation wanted certain doors shut and certain questions unasked. You can hear it in the language they use. Case inactive, not case solved. You can see it in the way agents smirk when asked about it on camera, like men guarding a joke only they understand. Why lock those files until the 2030s? Why outlive every suspect, every witness, every agent on the case? Because whatever truth is buried there, it doesn't protect Cooper. It protects the system that made him possible. And here's the part they'll never say out loud. D.B. Cooper wasn't just a man. He was an operation, a test, a probe into the cracks of airline security and pub, lick trust, and someone passed with flying colors. So when you think of that locked cabinet, remember this. It's not hiding who Cooper was. It's hiding who sent him. They want you to believe D.B. Cooper is just a ghost story from 1971, a clever man who hijacked a plane, took the money, and disappeared. But Cooper isn't dead in the woods. He isn't sipping whiskey on a porch somewhere, laughing at the FBI. Cooper never landed, because Cooper was never just a man. He was a message. The man in the grey suit became a shadow, a warning whispered across decades. Power doesn't need to show its face. It just needs to prove it can slip past every lock, every law, every eye watching the sky. That black parachute wasn't an escape. It was a calling card. The marked bills weren't clues. They were bait. And the last closed file cabinet isn't a grave. It's a doorway. Every institution that claims to protect you runs on secrets like this. Quiet tests of control, experiments in obedience. And every time they hide the truth, they're telling you the same thing. You'll never see the hand pulling the strings. Maybe Cooper worked alone. Maybe he didn't. But what matters is what he represents. A man who bent reality to his will and walked off the page of history, untouchable. That's why they had to bury him in myth, Because the second you realize men like that exist, you start to ask the wrong questions about who else is moving unseen. Look around you now. Cameras on every street, databases tracking every purchase, flights locked tighter than a fortress. And yet, somewhere, someone like Cooper could still walk through the cracks. Maybe already has. So here's the truth they'll never admit. You were never meant to hear this story, at least not like this. And now that you have, the line has already been crossed. The shadow of D.B. Cooper isn't up in the clouds. It's in the halls of power. It's in the rooms you'll never see, in the conversations never recorded, in the decisions made far above your head. And that shadow is still moving, so I'll leave you with this. If you had to jump tonight, not knowing if you'd live, not knowing if you'd land, would you pull the ripcord? You're not supposed to answer. You're supposed to forget. But you won't.